The views and opinions expressed on America's Workforce Union podcast and its digital media channels are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the producers or sponsors.
Welcome to the America's Workforce Radio Podcast, the flagship production of the American Workers Radio and Podcast Network, where organized labor and its never-ending fight to protect the rights of the American worker come first. Now, presented by LiUNA, Laborers International Union of North America. Here's your host, Ed Flash Ferenc.
What happened in New York City 113 years ago today. How one tragic event created safer conditions for workers. Today on the show, we'll hear from a labor professor on the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. Also, the UA's Veterans in Piping program and the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO. Welcome to the Monday, March 25th edition of America's Workforce, where we're available on at least 5 platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. We have a total of 3 guests on the show today. We're going to start things off with Rachel Lablance. Now, Rachel is the first female instructor in the United Association's Veterans in Piping program. We've done many, many shows with Veterans in Piping. This is a program that offers career preparation training in 3 disciplines within the piping industry. Number 1, HVAC. Number 2, welding. And number 3, fire suppression. And these trainings are offered at military bases. And Rachel is going to talk about that. Rachel is the first female instructor in the program's history. And it's only appropriate because March is Women's History Month, and she is making history. She'll talk about Camp Lejeune, and that's exactly where she was introduced to Veterans in Piping. She'll talk about how difficult it was to go through the program, the importance of union versus non-union. Really interesting story, and I'll tell you, just Google Veterans in Piping. You'll get a whole lot of information on what this program is all about. Mike Hazard, who is the guy that put it all together some years ago, has been on the show a number of times. And it's appropriate, too. Today is a very solemn anniversary. It was on this day, 113 years ago, that 147 people, mostly women, perished in a fire in New York City. They did not have sprinkler systems in buildings back then. And the UA does a great job. I encourage you to check out this website, sprinklerfitters669.org, sprinklerfitters669. So that fire happened in 1911. Well, in 1915, the non-union sprinkler fitter would draw $1 per day in wages, but after the United Association worked out an agreement with the Contractors Association, guess what? They went up to $2 a day. Keep in mind, this is 1915. The first agreement was a 5-year agreement, and before the agreement was finally signed, the wage rate was fixed at $4 per day, with a built-in adjustment to $4.50 per day for the last 2 years of the contract. Interesting history there. Sprinklerfitters669.org. Now, talking about that fire today, we're going to be joined with Mary Anne Trasciatti, who's a professor of labor studies at Hofstra University in New York, and she's also a member of the Triangle Shirtwaist Coalition. This is the Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition, which connects individuals and organizations with what happened on this day. A pivotal event in U.S. history and a turning point in labor's struggle to achieve, number 1, fair wages, number 2, dignity at work, and most importantly, safe working conditions. So many people go to work in the morning, don't come home at the end of the day. And we'll be talking more about that at the end of April when we commemorate Workers' Memorial Day. That day is April 28th, which is actually a Sunday, but we'll be doing a lot of features on the show working up to that. Greg Regan will be joining us to button up the show. Greg is the president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO, and he's got a lot on his plate today. Number one, the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act, which was introduced last week. And Greg spoke at a press conference on Capitol Hill alongside the National Letter Carriers Association. Postal workers and transportation workers across the country have been facing violent attacks and assaults. And this legislation actually takes measures to protect workers and penalize the assailants. Now, the carriers face a dual problem. One is assaults, as I mentioned, more than 2,000 in the last 3+ years, including 643 last year, 30% increase over the year before. The robbers, often at gunpoint, have mugged, sometimes shot letter carriers to steal the keys they carry to open banks of mailboxes. Opening the boxes, well, then they steal people's pension and Social Security checks. The other problem is that assaulting a letter carrier is a misdemeanor, not a felony. And this legislation would change that. So that's one thing he's going to talk about. Then there's the REEF Act, which was passed unanimously through the Senate Budget Committee. Now, if you go back to 2013, rail workers were subjected to a cut in their unemployment and sickness benefits, even though the program is paid for entirely by the railroads and workers at no cost to taxpayers. Now, that would change all that with this REEF Act. And lastly, Greg is going to talk about a letter that he put together to Norfolk Southern shareholders opposing a hostile takeover of the railroad by Ancora Holdings, which is a hedge fund that right now has a very large stake in Norfolk Southern. And I'll read some of the letter here. This is all posted on ttd.org. We are gravely concerned by recent news reports that a hedge fund, Ancora Holdings, has amassed a $1 billion stake in Norfolk Southern with the intention of ousting Alan Shaw as CEO. Replacing Mr. Shaw with Ancora's proposed candidate would be a tremendous mistake and a detrimental step for Norfolk Southern, its shareholders, and the entire Class 1 freight rail industry. Ancora and other Wall Street analysts have made misguided calls to replace Mr. Shaw because of a rise in Norfolk Southern operating ratio and a decrease in profits last year. And the letter goes on to talk about what happened in East Palestine, Ohio, which has cost the railroad and its shareholders over $1 billion to date, and it's still growing. And Greg points out that there have been more than 1,500 train accidents since East Palestine, and the industry is averaging about 1,000 derailments a year. And they're saying, look, we really don't like Alan Shaw, but chances are you're going to put somebody in there that's really not going to be very good, especially to workers. Again, that entire letter is posted on ttd.org. So Greg Regan will be our last guest on the show today. And now a brief look into the world of labor. This segment brought to you by Boyd Watterson Asset Management, offering fixed income, real estate, and equity investment options to clients nationwide. You can find more at boydwatterson.com. Well, as I indicated, this is a very, very significant date in labor union history. I want to take you back to 1911. March 25th, 1911, Francis Perkins was visiting with a friend who lived near Washington Square, New York City, when they heard fire engines and screams. They rushed out to the street to see what the trouble was. Well, a fire had broken out in a garment factory on the upper floors of a building on Washington Square, and the blaze ripped through the lint in the air. The only way out was down the elevator, which had been abandoned at the base of its shaft. The factory owner had locked the roof exit that day because, as he later testified, he was worried some of the workers might steal some of the blouses they were making. Perkins later recalled, the people had just begun to jump when we got there. They had been holding until that time, standing in the windowsills, being crowded by others behind them, the fire pressing closer and closer, the smoke closer and closer. Finally, firemen arrived with a net, and the victims began to jump, but the weight of their bodies was so great at the speed at which they were traveling, they broke through the net every one of them was killed. Everybody who jumped was killed. It was a horrifying spectacle. Well, by the time the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire was out, 147 young people were dead, either from their fall from the factory windows or from smoke inhalation. By the next day, New Yorkers were gathering to talk about what had happened on their watch. I can't begin to tell you how disturbed the people were everywhere, said Perkins. It was as though we had done something wrong. It shouldn't have been. 147 girls and boys killed in a factory. It was a terrible thing for the people of the city of New York. Well, seeing what happened on this day in 1911 changed Frances Perkins. She went on a mission of change. In 1919, over the fervent objections of men, then Governor Al Smith appointed her to the New York State Industrial Commission to help weed out the corruption that was weakening the new laws. She continued to be one of his closest advisors on labor issues. In 1929, when FDR replaced Smith as New York governor, he appointed Perkins to oversee the state's labor department as the Depression worsened. 1932, FDR elected president, and he asked Frances Perkins to serve as Secretary of Labor in his administration. She accepted only on the condition that he back her goals: unemployment insurance, health insurance, old age insurance, a 40-hour work week, a minimum wage, and the end of child labor. She later recalled, I remember he looked so startled and he said, well, do you think it can be done? She promised to find out. Well, once in office, Frances Perkins was a driving force behind the administration's massive investment in public works projects to get people back to work. She urged the government to spend $3.3 billion in schools, roads, and housing. In 1935, Roosevelt signed the Social Security Act, providing ordinary Americans with unemployment insurance. 1938, Congress passes the Fair Labor Standards Act, which established a minimum wage and maximum hours. It banned child labor. In conclusion, Frances Perkins and all those who worked with her transformed the horror of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire into the heart of our nation's basic social safety net. Amazing story, and I have to thank historian Heather Cox Richardson for putting that all together. She is one brilliant historian. All right, we're going to take a quick break. The UA's VIP program and their first female instructor coming up next.
This is America's Workforce.
It takes LiUNA to build North America's infrastructure. From roads and bridges to schools and skyscrapers, the men and women of LiUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, build the projects we depend on. From constructing the Freedom Tower on the site of the former World Trade Center to untangling Washington, D.C.'s congested interstate, LiUNA members do the work that matters. Find out what it takes to be built by LiUNA at liuna.org. That's LiUNA.org.
This portion of the show brought to you by the International Union of Bricklayers and Allied Craftworkers. For more information, please visit bacweb.org.
There is unity and strength for workers.
We are the USW.
We are the USW.
The United Steelworkers.
The largest industrial union in North America.
We represent 850,000 members in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean.
We work in metals,
rubber,
chemicals,
paper,
oil refining,
atomic energy, and the service sector.
We are steelworkers, standing strong and fighting for what's right.
This portion of the show is brought to you by Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield, Labor's trusted health partner, bringing people, communities, and care together to transform the future of health. For more information, please visit anthem.com/labor and trust. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, where you can find more at teamster.org.
A great union requires a reliable election system. Survey and Ballot Systems is a trusted election partner with more than 30 years of expertise in managing union elections. By partnering with SBS, your union can ensure it gets an auditable process and a high level of customer service. SBS is here to help you conduct your union vote securely, transparently, and with trust building always in mind. Visit surveyandballotsystems.com to learn more.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. You can find more at ifpte.org.
Something is happening in our world.
Throughout American history, working people have come together in unions to create change. Securing a minimum wage, making overtime pay a reality, leading the charge for gender equity and racial justice. Unions have been at the forefront of every major fight for workers' rights, women's rights, civil rights, and voting rights. And we still are. Higher wages, better health care, retirement security, workplace safety, the peace of mind knowing that someone's got your back. We made a difference yesterday. We continue to make a difference today. Then and now, decade after decade, improving the lives of all working people.
The Iron Workers Great Lakes District Council, consisting of 8 iron worker local unions in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. We build the skylines and bridges along the Great Lakes. With more work than ever before, the Great Lakes District Council is actively searching out the next great iron worker. Whether it's building the next Intel plant or constructing a bridge to safely connect our great cities along the lake. So join the Iron Workers Great Lakes District Council today. Find out how and learn more about the council by visiting iwdistrictcouncil.com. America's Workforce is presented by the Laborers International Union of North America. Feel the power right now at LiUNA.org.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferenc.
And don't forget, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast. By the way, this next segment brought to you in part by the United Labor Agency. ulagency.org is their website. All right, let's welcome our first of 3 guests on the show today. Our first being Rachel Lablance. Rachel, well, she spent 8 years in the Marines, actually a sergeant, and she was at Camp Lejeune, and now she is an instructor at the UA's, that's the United Association's Veterans in Piping program. And she is the first female instructor in the program's history. And we congratulate her on that. Also congratulate you being a Marine. That's a tough start in life. But you were telling me off the air here, Rachel, you had a pretty rough childhood. Maybe you can talk about that and how you found your way to the military. I guess I know a lot of kids have some tough times at home, and the military kind of straightens them out. So talk to me about that transition and how you found the Veterans in Piping program. Rachel, it's all yours.
All right. Well, basically, I was born in New Mexico. My mom was a single mother, just me and my sister. You know, it was kind of a rough growing up there, just my mom with herself and not really having a partner. And eventually we made our way back to Ohio, which is where my mom is from, Columbus area. You know, she just worked jobs that really just got us by, and I knew growing up that I didn't want that. You know, I wanted something a little bit more for myself. And I ended up joining the Marine Corps after high school. I've always been hands-on, interested in auto mechanics. I thought I was going to be a motor team mechanic, and it didn't turn out that way. They wanted me as an aircraft mechanic instead. So eventually I was able to do the welding route with that, went through Cherry Point's welding school. And after that, I knew eventually that I was going to transition out of the Marine Corps. Thought maybe I would just go and work on Cherry Point as a contractor there. But then the VIP program came up. I just was checking my emails one morning, and it was just a random flyer. I don't even remember who it was sent from, but I knew that is what I wanted to do. It said on the flyer, I believe, free welding, job placement, and that was perfect for me because after joining the Marine Corps, I have 2 kids, created my own family, and I knew that it was time to be home and not flying around everywhere anymore. And I needed to be mom. And that was just the perfect opportunity for me. So I jumped on it as soon as I could. And that's when I started my transition into the VIP program.
And it's good, too, because you indicated you had some welding experience in the military, so I imagine that transition worked out pretty well. As far as the VIP program, maybe you can just give us a snapshot of what you went through and how you found your way to be instructor, the first female instructor. That's an interesting journey in itself. Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. So basically, it's a 17-and-a-half-week program. I went through, like I said before, I do have a little bit of welding experience. So, it was just a different technique for me because obviously with the UA, we're welding pipe. I was not used to that. I was welding aircraft parts. So it was a little bit of a difference for me, but I still had the basics down, and it really helped me going through. So I ended up with 8 welding certs within that 17-and-a-half-week program. I ended up from there transitioning to Illinois, Southern Illinois, and I found my way to a coal-fired powerhouse, Prairie State Generating Company. I think it's one of the newer coal-fired powerhouses, and I was there for 8 years. And they kept me working. I learned a lot, worked with a lot of great people, and it helped me learn the trades. Obviously I was an 8-year sergeant before, so I kind of missed some of that. I was a little bit older of an apprentice because most people join, right after high school. But the 8 years experience in welding in the Marine Corps helped me. So anyways, I was pretty successful at that. And Mike Hazard, my boss, he took light of that. And the opportunity came up for me to be a welding instructor. And I, as soon as I could, I moved, packed my things from Illinois and made my way to North Carolina.
And now you're the first female welding instructor. How did that go over? I mean, was that difficult? It was as far as that transition and becoming a female welding instructor?
I don't think so. Really, I don't even look at it that way. In the Marine Corps, you hear brotherhood, sisterhood, and really in the UA, it is the same thing. And as long as you have your focus on the job, you know what needs to get done, and not everything else that's going on, and you have the ability and the knowledge to do something, then being a female, it doesn't necessarily, I don't think it really changes anything, Yes, sometimes the guys at first, me being an instructor, don't really know to take me seriously. But as soon as I strike a rod up or, show them how to TIG weld, they're like, oh, okay, she knows what she's doing. So, yeah, I have to prove myself a little bit, but that's perfectly fine.
Well, being a sergeant in the Marine Corps, well, that's significant in itself. So that training really, really grounded you and got you going. Now, being a first female instructor, I'm wondering, have more women joined the VIP program? Are you doing any outreach at Camp Lejeune?
Well, I have not had my first VIP female student yet. I'm hoping that I will soon. I've been there for a year now. There's not a whole lot of female Marines. You hear the few, the proud. Well, we are the fewer, the prouder. So I'm really hoping that soon we will get another female. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that opportunity.
Okay, Rachel, well, why don't we do this as a call to action here? I think it's significant. And, March is Women's History Month, so you're making history. Yes. The VIP program is making history. And I love Mike Hazard. I mean, he's been on the show many, many times. Obviously, he saw something in you. He saw the future that you probably didn't see, and he put you on that path. So that's kind of cool. But, we've got a pretty good audience here of union members, union and non-union, because when they're hearing about the union difference, they want to become union, the non-union ones. So I'm just wondering here, when's the next class? Maybe you can give us a quick rundown of what's going on at Camp Lejeune.
Okay, so actually we just graduated. It was March 21st, so last Thursday, and we will be classing up again April 8th. We have, so far, I think 9 students in this class, unless we have some people sneak their way in. I'm hoping for a full class is 20 students, so hoping next time maybe we can get a little bit more. So we'll start off the first week, going through OSHA, safety, and get the basics down, safety with hand tools and things like that, and then we'll work our way into using the torch and eventually be in the shop welding.
Mm-hmm. That's pretty cool. Well, Rachel, I thank you for joining us here on America's Workforce today. To button up this interview, I'm just wondering if there's anything that you would like to say to our listeners, especially if they want to take that giant leap like you did. Obviously, everything kind of fell in place. You had a good guy in Mike Hazard. He saw something in you. You are now the first female instructor of the VIP program. And this is your chance to sell the program. Go ahead.
Yeah, if there's anybody out there listening, I really hope if you have the ability to apply for the VIP as an active duty military member, really look into the program, do your research, read the career op, get on the VIP.org website, check it out. It has done wonders. It has changed my life. I am so happy with the decision that I did end up making this transition. Really look into it, and I'm sure, it can help you guys too.
Rachel, great job. Rachel Lablance, first female instructor in the VIP's program history. You just Google UA VIP, and you'll get a lot of information on their Veterans in Piping program. Rachel, great job. Thank you so much, okay?
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to remember the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire on this date, 113 years ago.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferenc.
It takes LiUNA to power North America with affordable energy. The men and women of LiUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, have the skills needed to build and maintain oil, natural gas, nuclear, solar, and wind projects that are shaping America's energy future. From new energy tech to retrofitted facilities, LiUNA members do it all. Find out what it takes to be powered by LiUNA at LiUNA.org. That's LiUNA.org.
Are you an experienced mechanical insulator looking to take your career to the next level? Insulators Local 50 in Central Ohio has steady work for a number of years. Insulators Local 50 offers a total wage and benefits package that can't be beat. It's not just the competitive wages. Local 50 also provides medical, vision, and dental insurance with no paycheck deductions for you and your family. Don't miss out on the chance to secure your future. Join us at Insulators Local 50. Earn great pay and the best benefits. Visit insulators50.com/AWF50 to fill out the online form, and a Local 50 representative will call to begin the process. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Communication Workers of America. You can find more at cwa-union.org.
There is unity and strength for workers.
We are the USW.
We are the USW.
The United Steelworkers.
The largest industrial union in North America.
We represent 850,000 members in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean.
We work in metals,
rubber,
chemicals,
paper,
oil refining,
atomic energy, and the service sector.
We are steelworkers, standing strong and fighting for what's right.
The Heat and Frost Insulators and Allied Workers are proud to be a title sponsor for America's Workforce Radio. The Insulators Union is leading the way in the mechanical insulation industry, fire stopping, and infectious disease control. Regarded as North America's energy conservation specialists, these professionals are known for their professional work and dedication. You can learn more about the Insulators Union at insulators.org. This segment of the show is brought to you by the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. For more information, please visit bmwe.org.
America's Workforce Radio is sponsored in part by the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, District Council 6, representing painters, glazers, drywall finishers, and sign and display industry workers. They remind you that belonging to a union is your right as an American.
The Alliance for American Manufacturing is a nonprofit, nonpartisan partnership formed back in 2007 by some of America's leading manufacturers and the United Steelworkers. Their mission is simple: strengthen American manufacturing and create new private sector jobs through smart public policies. Key word there is smart. We need to be smarter than ever in today's highly competitive world. The Alliance for American Manufacturing believes that an innovative and growing manufacturing base is vital to America's economic and national security, as well as providing good jobs for future generations. Good jobs today, good jobs tomorrow. Good American jobs. Find out more at americanmanufacturing.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Ironworkers. You can find more at ironworkers.org.
This segment of America's Workforce is brought to you by Survey and Ballot Systems. SBS has been providing unions with secure and flexible election options for over 30 years. Visit surveyandballotsystems.com to learn more.
Now, back to Ed Flash Ferenc with America's Workforce.
And remember, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast. By the way, this next segment brought to you in part by the Ohio Federation of Teachers, oh.aft.org. Let's go to line number 2 right now, and joining us from New York is Mary Anne Trasciatti, who's been on the show many, many times, especially on this very day. Today is the day, it was 113 years ago, that fire broke out in New York City, and 150 people, mostly women, immigrant women, perished. And it's called the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. And Mary Anne, well, along with being a professor, is part of the Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition. And we have to remember this because that was a game changer. Definitely a game changer for workers all around the world. Mary Anne, welcome back to America's Workforce. Talk to me a little bit about this coalition and the importance. It's so darn important to remember what happened because there were a lot of changes. Frances Perkins, I talked about this earlier in the show, she was one of the many people that watched what happened. She eventually became a labor secretary under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and we saw a lot of positive things happening because of what happened in 1911. And I know you talk a whole lot about this to your students over there at Hofstra University. So let's start right there, because I know this is very near and dear to your heart. Go ahead, Mary Anne.
Thank you very much for having me. And yes, you're right. The story is near and dear to my heart. My mother actually was a garment worker, though not in 1911. And she told me when I was a child growing up that she knew that she and the other girls in the factory were safe because of what had happened to those poor girls at Triangle. So Triangle is important to working people then, was important to my mom, and it's important to me. And as you said, it made contributed to the career of Frances Perkins. She saw the fire that day and was so moved by what she saw, so horrified, that she basically dedicated the rest of her life to advocating for workers, including pushing for things in the New Deal, protections that are threatened today. The National Labor Relations Board, for example, is threatened by a lawsuit. Social Security is constantly threatened. But those things are all outgrowths of the fire, believe it or not. Things like workers' comp and Social Security and the eradication of exploitative child labor, which, alas, is also making a comeback. All of those things really grew out of the fire and people's experiences of seeing this terrible thing. Women, some of them as young as 14, dying, at least 60 of them jumping out the windows of the factory because the doors were locked, preventing them from getting out. So it really, it left its mark on workers too, I should add. Government leaders, of course, stepped up. They felt pressured to do so, but so did working people. They organized, they agitated, they refused to allow themselves to be put into these situations So, they fought back by striking and organizing unions. And I think we're seeing that today, too. So the spirit of Triangle lives on.
Yeah. And it didn't happen overnight as far as these changes. I mean, this fire happened in 1911, and Frances Perkins, she entered FDR's administration in the early 30s. So we're looking, 20 years later, that's when we started seeing these changes. And as you pointed out, these changes are being threatened right now. It's really scary. Let me talk to you about labor studies over there at Hofstra. Now, you talk, I would assume you talk about this to students. How do they react to the history of labor? Because it's important to know where we were so many years ago and how these changes actually materialize. What's the reaction from students today, Mary Anne?
Well, students find the Triangle story in particular very compelling because the workers were their age. They look around and think, oh, that could be me, right? And a number of them are the descendants of garment workers, immigrants, whether in the garment industry or not. So it really resonates with them because it's a story of workers who went to the factory one day and never came home. They lived through COVID, the students, so they have a kind of a real visceral sense now of the need for workplace safety. And I got to tell you, I'm seeing more and more young people come to me with questions about organizing off campus, on campus, thoughts about what their work life is going to be when they graduate. So there's a growing interest in labor studies, I think mirroring what we're seeing as this growing militancy of workers generally in the U.S. and around the world. So I'm really optimistic. The history matters to them because for them it's a resource that they can use to empower themselves to organize and to really be militant in the present. So the response is really positive in the sense that I think they really get it. They see that these things are constantly in need of renewing, right, by struggle, that you can't just say, oh, we won, that's over, tick that box off, that the rights and the things that we win as working people are constantly imperiled, and the struggle is enduring, and they're ready for it.
Well, Mary Anne, that is really good to hear because we need another generation here to fight all the crap that's coming out of Washington, especially the anti-labor attitude with so many lawmakers. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of things that are under threat right now. Like you pointed out, Social Security is one. I mean, they want to raise the retirement age. As far as regulations go, regulations are there for a good reason. And many of those are saying, well, we don't need those regulations because they're not business friendly. But let's get back to now every year there is a service to remember what happened on this day in 1911. And I know you've been a big part of that over the years. And what was it last fall? Actually, there was I guess the memorial was completed, but there's still more to be done. Where do we stand with all of this right now, Mary Anne?
Well, March 25th in the morning, we remember the fire today and, of course, every year. And that ceremony happens at the corner of Washington Place and Green Street right in front of the building. And this year, it is we are thrilled that the memorial is up there. We dedicated the Triangle Fire Memorial, which I should add is New York City's first labor memorial, and one of a very small number of monuments in the city dedicated to women. Most of the workers who died that day were women, and as I mentioned, some of them quite young, nearly all of them immigrants, Italians and Jews. And the memorial is quite beautiful. I hope that your listeners, when they are in New York City, will come down to Greenwich Village to see it. It names the workers and gives their ages and tells the story of the fire. And it is, we believe, the first trilingual memorial in the U.S. It tells the story in English, obviously, but also Italian and Yiddish, languages that would have been familiar to the workers. And those components of the memorial are all up. We're waiting for the final piece, which is a steel ribbon that goes from about 12 feet above the ground up to the 9th floor where the most horrible part of the fire happened and where nearly all of the workers died. Again, many of them jumping from that floor to their deaths on the pavement below. But most of it is up there. It's a very moving experience. We've had terrific feedback. People come, they leave flowers, they reflect, and they're inspired by the story to organize in the now. That's really what we want this memorial to do, is to tell a story about then, but also to motivate people now. And from the response that we've been getting, the memorial is doing that. And so we're really happy about that.
Well, just like Frances Perkins, it took a while to get the changes after what happened in 1911. It took a while to get this thing done, from start to finish. I know you were involved. This was a labor of love for you. From the point that we have to do a memorial to now, how long was that time, Mary Anne?
14 years. Yeah, and I didn't know that when I agreed to lead this project. I still would have done it. It's important to me, both as the daughter and granddaughter, I should add, of garment workers, and my daughter now works in the industry. She's a graduate of the Fashion Institute of Technology. So, the garment industry is really important to the women in my family, and it's important to me, and keeping workers safe. This is important, and it was really a learning experience for me. I'm not an expert in architecture or preservation, but I kind of am now in a way. But it was great. It's a struggle, let me tell you. You do work around these issues. We did not have a lot of deep-pocketed organizations and individuals rushing to give us money, because these are some of the very entities that are pushing back against elements of the New Deal right now. So we relied primarily on the generosity of New York State, and some individuals and some foundations and labor unions really stepped up. So we're proud of the partnerships that we built, and we're proud to have built New York's first labor memorial.
Well, congratulations to you. Yeah, sadly, there's a lot of corporations that would like to go back to 1911 when it comes to the difference in regulations from then as where we are today, sadly. Mary Anne Trasciatti, professor of labor studies at Hofstra University in New York and a member of the Triangle Shirtwaist Coalition. Remember the Triangle Fire Coalition. Let that memory never fade away. Mary Anne, thank you so much for joining us here on America's Workforce.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure, Ed.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Greg Regan on behalf of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO.
This is America's Workforce. More shows available at awfradio.com.
It takes LiUNA to keep America running. Over 70,000 public employees are part of LiUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, delivering critical services such as healthcare and emergency response, as well as maintaining roads and sanitation systems. Even the National Postal Mail Handlers Union, representing over 47,000 U.S. postal workers, is affiliated with LiUNA. Find out what it takes for LiUNA to keep America running at LiUNA.org. That's LiUNA.org.
Hire union musicians. Call Music Talent of Cleveland at 216-881-1802. Call Music Talent of Cleveland as your dependable source for professional musicians in Northeast Ohio. Union musicians add harmony to weddings, elegance to parties, and uplifting music for all events. Music Talent of Cleveland contracts solo and ensemble musicians as well as bands and orchestras for single engagements. So hire union musicians. Call Music Talent of Cleveland today. 216-881-1802. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the United Auto Workers. Find more at uaw.org.
Union members need to be heard. Reliable and convenient union voting has never been more important than it is now. Make voting easy for your membership by working with survey and ballot systems. SBS offers encrypted and monitored solutions that ensure your elections are accurate and accessible for every member through mail-in, online, and in-person voting. Visit surveyandballotsystems.com and take the next step in getting secure and auditable elections.
The Iron Workers Great Lakes District Council, consisting of 8 ironworker local unions in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. We build the skylines and bridges along the Great Lakes. With more work than ever before, the Great Lakes District Council is actively searching out the next great iron worker, whether it's building the next Intel plant or constructing a bridge to safely connect our great cities along the lake. So join the Iron Workers Great Lakes District Council today. Find out how and learn more about the council by visiting iwdistrictcouncil.com. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Heat and Frost Insulators Labor Management Cooperative Trust. Find out more at insulators.org/LMCT.
America's Workforce is sponsored in part by Boyd Watterson Asset Management, LLC. Find out more about our investment solutions tailored to meet the needs of Taft-Hartley funds at boydwatterson.com.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the United Steelworkers. You can find more at usw.org.
Something is happening in our world.
Throughout American history, working people have come together in unions to create change. Securing a minimum wage, making overtime pay a reality, leading the charge for gender equity and racial justice. Unions have been at the forefront of every major fight for workers' rights, women's rights, civil rights, and voting rights. And we still are. Higher wages, better health care, retirement security, workplace safety, the peace of mind knowing that someone's got your back. We made a difference yesterday. We continue to make a difference today. Then and now, decade after decade, improving the lives of all working people.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferenc.
And don't forget, you can check us out on at least 5 platforms. That includes Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And when you get an opportunity, here's what you do. Just sign up and receive our shows on a regular basis and give us a rating. We always appreciate those 5-star ratings, so please keep them coming. All right, let's go to Washington, D.C. right now and join Greg Regan. Greg is president of the Transportation Trades Department of the AFL-CIO, and this is a collection of about 36 unions all dealing with transportation, whether it's on the road, whether it's trucking, rail, or in the air. And today, we're going to start things off with the Protect Our Letter Carriers Act. And I know, Greg, now this is a little bit different for you, but I understand that you spoke at a press conference last week, and it's important to show that unions have solidarity. If one union is having some problems, well, that's what unions do, try to help our brothers and sisters out. So talk to me about this, because a lot of postal workers and transportation workers are facing all kind of attacks and assaults. So talk to me about this press conference last week. Let's start there.
Yeah, it's actually really sad. A lot of postal workers, a lot of letter carriers are being assaulted for their universal keys to try to, by people who want to go break open those blue mailboxes all across the world, across the country. And for us, I mean, it's really, it's not a big stretch. I mean, obviously the letter carriers are an affiliate of ours, but this is a problem we're facing in every single forward-facing worker union in this country. I mean, you have whether it be flight attendants, whether it be pilots, transit workers. It's a major problem. Ferry workers. It's Amtrak workers. There's the threat of assault, of physical violence, is something that's consistent across every single worker we are lucky enough to represent. And unfortunately, while the solutions are oftentimes going to be a little bit different, I think the common thread is that we need federal action, and that's the common thing.
So, is there any legislation that would kind of rein this in right now?
Yeah, actually, the legislation that I spoke about, for the press conference, was just introduced last week. It's got bipartisan support, and it would do a lot of interesting things, actually. One is increase the penalties to make sure that people are prosecuted, but also it would change that key, the universal key that is apparently the most seductive thing for people who are trying to commit these assaults. So, it's really, Brian Fitzpatrick, who is a congressperson, a Republican from Pennsylvania. He's a former FBI agent. He's one of the lead sponsors of this, and he describes it. And when he talks about what the bill does, it's incredibly compelling.
I understand one of the problems is a lot of these assaults are classified as misdemeanors. Would this legislation that you're talking about turn that into a felony, to your knowledge?
I don't know about whether it's a misdemeanor versus felony. I do know that it is a federal crime to assault a letter carrier. This one would require full prosecution about people, making sure that there are the full sentences assessed on people who commit crimes against letter carriers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Greg, I know one of the problems here, I don't think the punishment is strong enough, and hopefully this legislation will move the needle in the right direction on that. But as far as you mentioned this Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican, it sounds like it's got bipartisan support. Is that what I'm hearing right now?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Good. Well, we'll see what happens here. This is the Protect Our Letters Carriers Act, and I know there were a lot of people at that press conference last week, and I see Fred Redmond was one of them, who's the Secretary-Treasurer of the AFL-CIO. We'll touch on that with him when we join with him in April. Let's move on to the REEF Act here. Why don't you explain what's going on? This is involving rail workers and unemployment and sickness benefits. There seems to be a problem here because it was cut, and this would restore it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, this is like only in Washington type of story, basically. That I don't know if you recall way back in the day when sequestration was the big thing. Mm-hmm. They had mandatory cuts across the board, and it was meant to be the thing that was such a terrible consequence that it would force Congress to make a budget deal. Well, Congress let it happen, and they cut funding across the board in every federal agency and every federal program. And then they finally reached a budget deal after a little while, and sequestration went away, except they did not remove sequestration for railroad retirement railroad disability and unemployment insurance. So this is the only program that is still subject to this stupid idea, like the cliff that was self-created. And it's this one aspect of a program that is funded by workers and their employers. It has no taxpayer dollars that go to it at all. And it's just a stupid quirk that is making people suffer, and the people who have earned these benefits.
Once again, no cost to taxpayers, and there's a problem. Unbelievable, but we're talking to Washington here. All right, Greg, let's move on to Norfolk Southern shareholders. Apparently, you wrote a letter, and I read part of it on the show, about this hostile takeover. It's not done yet, but this company called, it's a hedge fund called Ancora Holdings, and they want to knock out the CEO. Talk to me about this. This is interesting because when Wall Street gets involved, there's all kind of problems. So explain this to me.
Yeah. So look, I mean, if you would ask me a year ago if I'd be writing a letter in support of a Class 1 railroad CEO, I would have told you were nuts. So, just to tell you how much of a threat or how dangerous I think this is, should say something. The fact that I wrote a 3-page letter, supporting Alan Shaw at Norfolk Southern and then the direction that he's taking the railroad. And frankly, you look at the track record of a company like this. I mean, they did the same type of thing at Bed Bath & Beyond, for example. And ousted the CEO, and then all of a sudden, they got out. They got their money, got out, and Bed Bath & Beyond no longer exists. It was a very, they changed the entire business strategy, cut down on how they operated and what their strategy was. And at the end of the day, it's just they're not in it for long-term growth. They're in it for themselves, their short-term gains. And I think this is a really, really, it would be like a tripling down on the precision scheduled railroading business practice that has already been a major problem in the industry. And I think that it's time for us to stand up to the Wall Street mindset in the railroads and actually try to put railroading first and the country first and the workers first.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of this has to do with the fact that that train derailment in East Palestine cost over $1 billion. The shareholders don't like spending that kind of money, so they figured, let's just dump the CEO. But the problem is, what kind of CEO are they going to put in there? All right, you got to read this letter, those of you listening right now. It's posted on the TTD website, ttd.org. Rail labor opposes Ancora's proposed ouster of Norfolk Southern CEO. Interesting story. Like you said, it's not too often you support a CEO, but in this case, you got to do it. You got to do it. Okay, my brother, you take care. We'll talk to you next month, okay?
All right, thanks, Flash.
All right, that'll be it for another edition of America's Workforce. Coming up tomorrow, our independent labor voice, Tom Buffenbarger, and the sheet metal workers. Until then, all of you have a safe and wonderful day.
That concludes another episode of the America's Workforce Radio Podcast. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. America's Workforce is a production of Labor Tools and BMA Media Group. Find out more information online at labortools.com.